A very good evening to everybody who's present and welcome to yet another ISBF guest lecture. These guest lectures are aimed at providing an insight to you all, which are the participants, into topics and issues and areas which may or may not be covered extensively through the academics which are being pursued by you. To that effect, in the past, we've had a variety of speakers from different walks of life who have shared their knowledge, analyses, and perspectives on a plethora of topics from the realm, but not limited to economics, management, and finance. This knowledge is what makes a student stand out when they step out into the real world and allows them to hit the ground running. Today, we have the pleasure of having with us Professor Arun Kumar Agarwal, who is a qualified chartered accountant and a company secretary and has over 35 years of corporate experience. Professor Agarwal, who having started as a management trainee in finance and accounts with the erstwhile Shriram Group, he went on to become the regional director of finance for India, Mauritius, Bhutan, and Sri Lanka for Group 4S Security Services, a multinational security company which has its head office in the United States. In his 35 years long career, he has worked in companies such as Eicher Tractors, which is now Eicher Motors, Khaitan Group of Industries, Max India, and Fortis Healthcare, and has not just worked in India, but abroad as well, such as in countries like Nigeria and Saudi Arabia. Since 2014, he is associated with IBS Gurgaon as an adjunct professor of finance. We're glad to have you with us, sir.
Thank you.
Today's topic, a winning strategy in a competitive environment, aims at enlightening you all about the machinations and the nitty-gritties across various departments and industries in a globally connected world, which makes brands customize their products while ensuring a formidable bottom line. Does that make sense? Well, to tell you what it actually is, we will have Professor Arun Kumar Agarwal take you through the guest lecture. So without further ado, let me request you, Professor Saab, to take us through today's lecture. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Siddharthji. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to sharing my perspective, my experience, and whatever knowledge I have gained on my way to the present position. I want to share it with the students, and I hope that they benefit from it. I have made a very small presentation, which is of about 13 slides only. And I will just keep that on the side. I don't want to make it into a presentation-oriented, session, but just to keep it on the side, to look at the finer points, I've shared it. I hope my screen is visible to all of you.
Yes, sir, it is. Thank you.
Okay. Now, one of the things that I have seen evolve in the course of my own career is the shift in India from a controlled economy to a more market competitive economy. When I started my career, it was very, very controlled. If you wanted to set up a manufacturing enterprise or any business, there was a license regime. And now we are sitting in a highly competitive Indian economy. For the students who are very young, they would not have known about the earlier things. So we will focus on how the competitive environment has impacted business, industry, and in turn, how does it impact the strategies that are framed in boardrooms for the purpose of beating the competition. Now, one of the things that we need to understand is, if we want to understand how competitive environment impacts strategy, we must understand what exactly does competitive environment mean. I would request all the students to participate with me. I will request them to ask me questions at any point in time, so that they can get their doubts clarified to the best of my ability. And towards the end of the session, they can ask me questions. I have no issues, and I'll be very happy to answer them. So coming now to the competitive environment, what constitutes competition? Do you have any views? What exactly does competitive environment mean? Or in other words, you see, one of the things you will note is that we say that we are living in a world of intense competition, but we never use the word perfect competition. We are not living in a world of perfect competition, but we are living in a world of intense competition. So what does it mean and what is the fine point of difference? I would request you to share your views. Any of the students, any of the attendees who would want to put forward any ideas?
Students, considering that this is being done in a webinar mode, you can go ahead and share your views through the chat box, which is there in the bottom of the screen. So if anybody would like to go ahead and answer Sir's question, please feel free to do so. And it will be great if you guys can participate as much as possible. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you, sir.
No problem. Okay, in the meantime, I'll keep on sharing my views. You see, what does competition mean? All of you are students of economics, and you all know that competition basically means a few characteristics. And those characteristics you have studied in economics right from class 10 onwards, I believe. You know, you have a large number of buyers and sellers. The products are homogeneous. That means everybody is selling the same products. There are no barriers to entry or exit, and no individual buyer or seller can impact in any way the market. In other words, no individual buyer can impact demand, and no individual seller can impact the supply, right? So if that is the case, then in competitive market, it is absolutely a free entry exit. And this is the definition of perfect competition. In a perfect competitive market, all products are homogeneous. Now, in today's world, when we talk about intense competition, we know that all products are not homogeneous. This particular characteristic of homogeneous products is the one which makes, one second. Yeah, which makes, the companies to maintain some flexibility in pricing. What does competition do to business? It eliminates the flexibility in the hands of the sellers, in the hands of the companies to maneuver prices. Because the greater the competition, the closer a market is to perfect competition, the greater is the similarity of the products that are being offered. And therefore, lesser is the flexibility to the companies or to the sellers to play on prices. So today, if we look around us, whether it is automobile industry or electronics or consumer goods, all of these industries have very, very intense competition. The competition is very stiff, very intense, but it is not perfect. So in the business world, what emerges is that irrespective of the size of competition, irrespective of the intensity of competition, it will never be allowed to become a perfectly competitive market. If it becomes a perfectly competitive market, then individual companies have absolutely no leeway to sell their products. Then anything which is cheap will be sold. So price flexibility goes for a 6. On the other hand, if we look at those economies or those markets where competition is not there, there you will find that the flexibility of pricing is resting solely with the seller, because he is the only source of supply, and therefore he can follow a pricing pattern which is called in economics cost plus pricing. So whatever is my cost, I add my profit to it, and that is the price I will sell at. And nobody can do anything about it because I am the sole seller. Now, how does a monopolistically inclined market behave compared to a competitive market? In a monopolistically inclined market, because there is only one seller and because he has the absolute control on pricing, he does not find the necessity, he does not find the need to enhance quality for the purpose of the consumer. He does not find the need in order to give choices to the consumer. He does not find it, in his interest to do anything that will enhance the consumer experience. And the moment you start to move towards competition, all these walls which are there in a monopolistically inclined market, they begin to fall. And then all of a sudden, you find that choices come into the picture. There are different ways of marketing the product. Consumer becomes important. Now everybody is looking to see how he can make the customer happier than the other guy. And that is where competition changes the entire mechanism of business. If you remember, most of you would not know, but just for the sake of your understanding, I'll give a very simple example. You know, India got its independence in 1947. And at that time, after post-independence, India had two big car companies. One was Hindustan Motors and the other was Premier Automobiles, or earlier it was known as Fiat. Now, Hindustan Automobiles was manufacturing a car by the brand of Ambassador, right? And Fiat was selling Fiat cars, which was basically an Italian product, and Ambassador was a same model, which there was a company in UK called Landmaster or something like that, right? So what happened was, till 1982, when Maruti came into the picture, there was no improvement in the vehicle that was being sold. There was no necessity. There were only two cars on the road, Ambassador and Fiat. And therefore, the market was very small. There was nothing called trying to get an economy for the customer. Whatever was the cost of manufacture, add the profits and sell at that price. So eventually, there was no necessity felt to enhance consumer experience in any way. And what was the result of that? That during this time, from 1947 to 1982, there was no technological advancement. There was no technological innovation which was brought into the car industry in India, right till the time Maruti came. The moment Maruti entered, the entire dynamics changed and those companies could not survive. The profits that they made during that time, they did not invest in R&D in order to give a better technology, in order to give a better product, and therefore they were left behind and they just had to close shop in their original format. It was Maruti all the way, and then Hyundai came in. After that, you are familiar with all the cars that are there, that are available today. The reason I am giving you this example is, I want you to understand that if there is no competition, then there is no desire on the part of the seller, on the part of the industry, to change the consumer experience. They are not bothered. India as a population, when these cars were selling in 1971, India had a population of 63 crores. And in 1961, it had a population of 44 million, 439 million. So basically what happened, what it meant was, there was a population, and out of that population, there were people who had a demand for cars, and whatever demand was there had to be met out of these two cars. And by the choice of the basic difference, they had to buy one of them. So everybody, as far as the car manufacturers were concerned, they had adequate demand for the purpose of their manufacturing and their businesses. So they had to do nothing in order to develop the automobile industry. The moment Maruti came into the picture, everything changed. You all of a sudden found that the focus was now more on customer. The focus was more on price. The focus was more on how to reduce the price instead of how to increase the price. So the first thing that competition does in any business environment is that it removes the flexibility on the part of the manufacturers and sellers to maneuver pricing. Pricing control goes out of their hands, because now in competitive market, the price will be determined by the market, that is by the market forces of demand and supply. There is no individual seller or no individual buyer who can influence the price. The price is given by the market. So, I mean, this is a very major difference. And in 1992-93, when India opened up, this changed completely. You had banks in the private sector, you had airlines in the private sector, and in 2001, you had insurance which came in the private sector. All of a sudden, the Indian economy was thrown into the world of competitive market conditions. And that changed the entire mechanism of the market. That changed the entire vision, the entire strategization of companies. Because prior to the privatization of banks, there were only the 14 nationalized banks and a few private banks, right? Before the emergence of opening up of the aviation sector, you only had Indian Airlines and Air India. So there was no choice to the customer. Whenever you don't have competition in any market which does not have competition, the market tends to become very small. In other words, market becomes very small. Why? Because the customer has no choice. Either he has to shell out that money for the product or he cannot afford it. He cannot buy. It is only when competition comes in that industry market begins to expand. Right? So any questions so far? Anything that anybody wants to ask? Okay. Okay. So I'll carry on from here. Now, once I know that I don't have the capacity, I don't have the wherewithal, I don't have the power to influence price in a competitive market, then my objective, like the objective of every business in the world, is to maximize shareholder value. Every business in the world under the sun has only one business objective, and that is to maximize shareholder value. Shareholder value arises from where? It arises from sales and costs. Sales minus cost is equal to profit, and profit creates shareholder value. And if the profit is increased, the shareholder value increases. I mean, that is the conventional wisdom about shareholder value and profitability. Now, if sales is out of my control, then what am I left with? My objective is still to maximize shareholder value. That means still to earn higher profits every year, still to grow my business and earn ever growing profits. But I don't have the control over sales anymore. I mean, when I say sales, I mean the price, which means that I am forced to achieve my objectives through cost management. So cost management becomes the key in a competitive environment, because there is no way I can maneuver the sales price. But that is where the catch lies. In a competitive economy, there is maneuverability in fixing the sale price. And that comes from the effort on the part of the entrepreneurs or the effort on the part of the businesses to try to bring in imperfection in the market. How do they bring in imperfection in the market? By bringing out a differentiation in their product compared to the products being offered by their competitors. So in a competitive market, every day we look at ads, right? Whenever we switch on the TV, whenever we look at any media, whether social or anything, we are bombarded with advertisements. Now, they are all advertising. Greater the competition, greater the need for advertising, because you have to publicize. Now, just imagine, you have got two soft drink companies in the world, Coke and Pepsi. Now, irrespective of the kind of business strategy, market strategy they follow, broadly, the division of the market would be either 55% of between 50 to 55% for the leader and between 45 to 50% to the second person. The whole game globally lies within the spectrum of these 8 to 10%. And yet you will find that they are the largest advertisers in the world. If there is any sports event, if there is anything happening around the world, you will find among the sponsors either Coke or Pepsi. Why? That is the question. They know that the market share is there to stay. So why are they still spending money? They are spending money because if they don't spend money, the public will forget them. They, just to be relevant, they have these huge expenditures that they incur on advertising and business promotion. That is, and what is the result of that? You see, if the market is split between two entrepreneurs or two brands, then the only way that they can grow and they can exceed their pre-competition level profits is by expanding the market. Therefore, competition it drives businesses to expand markets. Competition, what does it do in the marketplace? It creates more demand. That means the market size increases. When only Hindustan Motors and Fiat was selling, the number of cars sold were negligible compared to today's sales. So what has happened? The market has grown. Competition expands the market on the back of cost economies and on the cost of competitive pricing, and obviously delivering customer value. That is where these are the things that come in when competition comes in. In none of the ads in a competitive industry, whether it is auto, whether it is electronics, whether it is white goods, you will not find any advertisement, saying that please buy my product because it is cheaper. Maruti will not advertise and say you buy my vehicle because it is cheaper than Hyundai. Nor will Samsung say you buy my TV because it is cheaper than the other brands which are available in the country. They all focus on non-pricing issue. Buy my car because it is the best. Buy my car because it is different. They are focusing as a strategy not to say that I am the cheapest, but they are saying that I am the best. In other words, in a competitive economy, the focus of business promotion shifts from price to quality, to I am different. The experience in SpiceJet, they say, is the best. Fly Emirates and they show you how comfortable you are, how well you are taken care of. All aesthetics are put into the ad. And they don't talk about the ticket price. They don't talk about the price. Which means that the price is out of their control anyway. So they do not want to lose the control completely. The moment they keep on hammering in the minds of the customers that Maruti is a good value for money, Maruti is a good value for money, it gets settled down as a slogan. They create perceptions. They create a system of making choices in the minds of the customers. And that gives them the ability to maneuver the prices. And the best way to understand this is, today we are in 2021, right? There is a model of Maruti which is called Swift. Swift has been for selling since 2007. So almost 14 years, Swift has been selling. You pick up the last 10 years model of Swift and you put them side by side and start from 2015, 2016, look at every model and try to see with each successive year what changes have taken place to that model. In other words, what are the features that have got added? You will all remember that till about 3 or 4 years ago, Swift did not have a rear camera. It did not have, a collapsible front mirror, the two mirrors, right? And then one fine morning, you found that they have introduced the rear camera. Every time a company does an innovative change to its product in a competitive market, it is opening a window of opportunity for itself. That window of opportunity gives it the freedom to change the price. Because what have they done by doing that? They have brought imperfection into an otherwise almost perfectly competitive market. And that innovation is technology driven. So that window of opportunity that is opened is for a very short time. So Maruti brings in a feature which is not there in the competitors. That gives an opportunity to Maruti to hike the price. And then that window of opportunity is no longer a secret. So within no time, all competitors have got the same innovation fixed into their cars. Now that window of opportunity has closed. No longer is that window of opportunity of any use to Maruti now. It has to go on to it has to open another window of opportunity, which means that in a competitive environment, the most important thing is you have to keep on innovating. There is no choice. There is no alternative, because only by innovating, only by creating more and more, innovative ideas into the product, you are able to differentiate your product from that of the consumers. Every time you do that, a small window of opportunity opens, and it is open till the time that the competition follows that. And during that time, you are able to maneuver the price a bit to your advantage. And this means that competitive economies tend to become technologically very advanced. Technologically, they become very advanced because it is the backbone of their survival. If they don't innovate, if they don't, invest in R&D, if they don't invest in technology, they will not be able to survive in competition. Because the customer has now choices. You have to make the best of those choices, even from the point of view of industry. So that is, in other words, and that is the reason you will find that worldwide, those economies which are competitive, like America has, US, the West, has always been competitive. Business was never under controlled environment. Therefore, they are technologically the most advanced nations in the world. Same is the case with Japan. On the other hand, those economies which are not competitive, they don't technologically advance because they don't feel the necessity of investing in technology. They are able to sell whatever they produce. Look at the case of Indian Railways. It is a monopoly. There is no other rail service which is operating, all India for the people of India, right? So look at where the Indian Railways is in terms of technology. If there were 5 or 7 railway companies running parallel, railway services, Indian Railways would have been a different story. And that has played out in aviation. Look at where Air India, Indian Airlines were, and look at where, the competition today has taken this industry to. The market has expanded multi-fold. So technology is the backbone in a competitive environment. At least we have seen that it is the backbone from the point of view of the selling side, right? Because there are two drivers to shareholder value: sales and price and costs. So sales are obviously driven by technology because they enable you have to make your product different. Number one. Number two, you have to give choices to the consumer. Look at, and another great example is FMCG. It is one of the most competitive areas. Look at Nestle, look at Hindustan Lever, look at ITC. ITC came into FMCG about 15, 20 years ago, and look at how it has progressed. Every time, you see, if a competitor comes, one of the two things is likely to happen. One, that the market gets split. So if the market pie is, let's say, 100 units, there were 2 people selling, so each one was sharing 50-50. Now the third player has come in, so theoretically, the market share becomes 33, 33, 33. It can marginally vary, but broadly it will be within that equation. If that is the case, then how do you go back to your objective is still to maximize your profits. If on a 50-50 you were earning $1 million every year, on a 33 you have to ensure that you earn more than 1 million. So how do you do that? You do that by expanding the market. How do you expand the market? By giving choices to the consumers. Give them choices. And that is the reason you will find every competitive product, every competitive company has a basket of products. And those baskets may be within the same price range. Within the same price band of 7 lakhs, Maruti may be offering 3 different models or 4 different models. The idea is what? The idea is to give choice to consumers. The aesthetic appeal, the comfort appeal, the performance appeal, and the basic inclination to performance appeal. That is what makes competition so exciting. That is what takes economies from a very backward technologically placed countries to technologically advanced countries. Since the time India opened up in 1993, the technological advancement that has taken place within India itself is phenomenal. We are today talking about green energy. We are talking about, fossil fuels becoming redundant. Why all of a sudden you have started to see advertisements on TV channels where Saudi Arabian government is saying, come visit Arabia? Saudi Arabia is still one of the most conservative countries in the world. There was nothing called tourism in Saudi Arabia. They have realized that their main forte is oil, and oil is slowly becoming obsolete. In another 15, 20, 25 years, oil will no longer be the key driver of global economy. If the focus would have shifted, and if the focus would have shifted, where will the Saudis go? At the end of the day, they have to find an alternative. Dubai also was in the same position. All these Middle East countries were in the same position, and they adopted different paths. Some adopted it earlier, like Dubai, and some are adopting it now. Because they understand that if they do not keep pace with the changing world, changing technologies, changing technologies, they will be left behind. They will have no recourse. So Saudi Arabia is trying to, at the moment, pitch money on tourism. Dubai tried to follow the same route, but in a different format. It went on to become a financial hub in the Middle East, like you have Singapore, like you had Hong Kong, like you have UK. So Dubai became that, and then it became a real estate hub. So what I'm only trying to say is that if you are competitive, if we are living in a competitive world, then the technologies of today will become obsolete even before we realize it. In a non-competitive world, technologies last very long. They have a long life cycle. The greater the competition, lesser is the life cycle of technology. Is it clear? Would anybody want to say anything? Is there anything that anybody would want to comment on? Am I coming across clearly?
Students, if you guys want to share anything, please just put it in the chat box, or you can drop it in the Q&A section. That would be pretty good. Also, sir, usually the format that we usually follow is we tend to have a question and answer session right at the end of the last 10 minutes of the guest lecture. Some of the students have actually direct messaged me, because of communication network issues. So I've written down their questions.
Excellent,
read them out later.
Excellent. So I'll carry on from here. Now, right, we have understood about the strategization in relation to how to protect the selling prices and margins, right? We are able to follow you, sir. Thank you. This is a message from Kala Subara Medha. Thank you very much for your message. I'll carry on. Now we come to the second important part of the impact of competition on business, and that is on cost. How do I, strategize in a competitive environment in order to make get cost economies? Because my objective is to earn maximum profits. The selling price maneuverability is very limited. I try to maximize that through innovation and technology, but still it remains restricted because of the basic competitive nature of the market, right? So the other important thing is, how do I manage my costs? That becomes a very major strategic area for competitive businesses. Cost management means what? That how can I, without impacting my quality, how can I improve my cost? I'll give you a very simple example. When I was young, that sounds many, many 100 years ago, ceiling fans used to be made out of pig iron. And there was a fan which was there at that time. You had fans in the range of 48 inches, which was the standard, fan size, the size of the diameter of the wings. Now, these fans were so heavy that you would find it difficult to pick up a fan at that time, 1965-66 model. Today, the fans are so light. They are made of aluminum blades instead of pig iron. The blades are half the size of the earlier fans. and the air delivery is far superior. In other words, and the cost is much less. In other words, what has happened? What has happened in the competitive world? You have to manage costs. So you have to find newer ways of reducing your cost, which starts from composition of your product, of your raw materials, from the processes that you use, from the machines that you use, from the kind of skill of the labor that you use, from the management philosophy that you use. 50, 70 years ago, the whole fan used to be made within one factory. So if Usha fan was making fans, then the entire fan was made in Usha, right from the stage when the iron was melted in order to form the top and bottom cover. There used to be a foundry. So the factory had a foundry, the factory had a machine shop, the foundry had a paint shop, but everything was manufactured within the shop, within the company, which meant huge investment. Then in the 1970s, somebody thought, why do we have to buy raw material and make it? Why can't we buy components and then start to assemble? So the production method shifted from 100% raw material based to raw material and component based. So the assembly line form of manufacture came into existence. And you found that you could produce more fans at a lower cost. And all the time, the product was undergoing a very, very huge technological change. You would remember, ask your dad, ask your parents, they would tell you. In the earlier cars, the dashboard and everything used to be made of steel. The car used to weigh almost half a ton. And today you find cars which are much lighter in weight. What does it mean? It means low consumption of steel. It means the raw material cost has reduced. It means that the product becomes cost effective. It means that more and more people can afford that product. It means that the demand for that product would increase universally. It means that the size of the market would expand. So earlier, the restricted size of the market now in competitive environment becomes huge. So if you look at the competitive economies of the world, you will find they are all making units in millions of units. Maruti makes 120,000, 130,000, 150,000 cars per month. In the 1970s, the total production of India in automobiles was 20,000, including Hindustan Motors and Fiat put together. So the point I'm trying to make is that unless and until you are able to innovate in the raw material as well, then the entire machines have changed. You have got machines that consume lesser power and give you a better productivity. I'll give you a very simple example. In every shop, in every product, manufacturing of every product, there is a process which is called painting. If you make car doors, they are made from raw iron and afterwards they have to be painted. So everywhere there were paint booths where the door will go in and inside there were spray guns, and while it was going, they would spray the paint and it will come out painted. Now, when a lot of research went into it, when they tried to find out how can they economize on the cost of material, they found that by the spray gun process, a lot of paint was getting wasted, because when they sprayed, then paint was getting sprayed and a lot of it would just go and cling onto the opposite wall. So they developed a new technology which was called electroplating. What they did was, instead of spray guns, now it is electroplating. So you have a very uniform surface. The quality of paint has improved. There is no bubbling. There is no difference in thickness of the paint. It is all absolutely computer measured and the wastage is zero. This is what technology does to a product's cost. And this happens only when competition is there. Because if it is monopoly, it makes no difference. I will get my price, that's it. Similarly, I'll give you an example of the cement industry. Now in cement industry, they need a lot of power, right? And the power plants, they create a waste, which is called fly ash. Now, fly ash is a waste which it comes in the air from the chimneys and then it settles down on the road of the factory and it creates a huge mess. And the cement companies used to pay money to the transporters to remove the fly ash from their premises. Then what happened? In the lab, there was a test which was done, and they suddenly found that the basic raw material in manufacture of cement is limestone. So they found that if out of 100 units, I use 95 units of limestone, I can add 5 units of fly ash, and I will get a cement which is of the same quality. So what have I done in the bargain? I have replaced 100% limestone with only 95% limestone and 5% fly ash, which is free. So I have reduced my cost of raw material by 5% straight away. This is what technology does in a competitive market. Or we can say that this is what competitive environment does to technology. Whichever way you decide to look at it, whichever way you choose to look at it, it is technology all the way. In a competitive business environment, it is technology all the way. That drives prices, that drives cost economization. You have to, the more you invest, therefore you will find that some of the most successful brands, companies in the competitive world are companies who invest in technology, who invest in R&D. You cannot be an industry leader in a competitive environment unless you are a technology leader as well. Look at Microsoft. Look at, this one. There are so many companies. At the right time, you tend to forget the names. Look at Microsoft. Look at all these. Look at Tesla. Now that Tesla is making a lot of news headlines, you will find that it is coming out with an electric car. And look at the prices of its shares. They've gone crazy. Technology is the name of the game in a competitive environment. So coming back now, after all this perspective, coming back now to the key question of what business strategies, how do we strategize in order to win in a competitive market? I will take you to a slide straight away. I won't go through the intermediary slides. I will take you to this slide. Winning strategies. On the basis of what? If you want, I can send you this presentation afterwards. Mr. Siddharth can, request me, and I will send this. Presentation to him by mail, and then he can circulate it to all of you. I have no problems in doing that. I will be most happy to do that. But
Definitely,
just to,
sir.
yeah,
Definitely.
yeah. So just to give you now the concluding remarks on the basis of my whatever analysis I could do and whatever I could share out of my experience with you. All the winning strategies in the competitive markets can be broken up into two categories: business strategies and financial strategies, right? Business strategies are those strategies which tend to enhance my business footprint in the market. So these strategies include, I offer more choices. The more choices I offer, greater will be my footprint in the market. I invest in R&D. I keep ahead of the competition by being innovative. It is the leader who is innovative in a competitive market. Everybody else is a follower. Everybody else just follows, right? And then I have to protect business strategies, protecting margins also, which means what? I have to provide value for money, which means what? I have to give quality. Quality wins consumer loyalty at the end of the day, right? So if I find that my product is the best value for money, that means my product for that price offers the best quality. So these are the winning strategies in a competitive market. How many choices can you give? The more choices you can give, greater will be your footprint and greater will be your market share. Similarly, what are the financial strategies in order to win in the competitive market? Cost management, capex planning. You have to invest in technology. You have to invest in research and development. If you don't do that, You will not be able to win in a competitive market, because it is through investment in technology, through R&D, that you are able to get the basic advantage of cost reduction. You get your economics from there, right? Is my screen visible?
Yes,
Yeah.
sir, we can see it. Yes, sir.
Okay. And of course, capital structure planning, debt free. One of the things that is said in financial management, this is the last point I'm making, then I'll be through with it. Everybody, all of us who study finance, we study one thing which is called financial leveraging or capital gearing or trading on equity. What does it mean? It means that if I finance my project, if I finance my business by debt, I am able to increase the return to my equity shareholders. That means I am leveraging debt. I am leveraging debt to enhance return to my equity shareholders, right? Now, in spite of this financial truth, more and more companies are proclaiming to become debt free. So is it not a paradox? On the one hand, I know that if I go in for debt financing, I can increase the return to my equity shareholders. And yet I say I want to become debt free. So this sounds like a paradox. The only reason why this is happening is debt at the end of the day is a risk capital. I have to return the principal. I have to pay interest. I cannot default. Otherwise, in today's environment, I lose my company, right? So it is a risk capital. If the environment is not risk friendly, if the environment is very threatening, if the environment is very unpredictable, if the environment is less than par, then I will not want to finance out of risk. And these times, because of COVID is one reason, but we are living in a very unsettled world. We are living in a world which is on a tinderbox. Anything can spark a huge catastrophe, whether it is South China Sea, whether it is Iran, anything can happen anywhere in the world, which will change the political and economic temperature of the world. So that is the reason when the environment becomes very risky, then companies want to become debt free, even when they know that they are foregoing a cheaper source of money. No source of money is more expensive than equity. I'm not going into the details of this because these will be part of your regular curriculum, but I'm just telling you the major points. So in a competitive environment, you have to see whether you want to be debt free. So capital structure planning is very important because that can upset your apple cart, right? So as a last comment, in a competitive economy, it is technology all the way. Market leaders have to be technology leaders as well. No exceptions. If you follow this, in my experience, you have a winning formula. Here I have given you some examples of Maruti's offer of choices for cars within the 7 lakh range. It is everybody by offering 4 models in that same price band, they are increasing the choices for the customers. Somebody prefers a Brezza, somebody prefers a Baleno, somebody prefers a Swift. So all of them are able to come and buy in one place. So they are able to consolidate the demand of this diverse section of society into their company. Similarly, if you look at the evolution of mobile phones for the last 20 years, you will see how technology has changed the phones, how product innovation has led to competitive advantage. So these are some of the things that I'll just show you this picture also. Yeah, so you can have a look here, and these are how technology has to play a very major role in order to win in a competitive market, right? So thank you very much for your patience, and now I look forward to your participation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for such an enlightening lecture today. Many times we as hosts, we tend to, when we have to go ahead and end the lecture, we tend to go ahead and give a fake praise. But to be very honest, today, I think the lecture, and especially the examples that you were citing, were extremely, extremely insightful, and sort of puts a lot of things into place and sort of makes you understand how these brands are working in a global economy. So we've received a few questions already.
Yeah, sure.
One of them is, it's actually a pretty long question, so I'll quickly try to read it. There is a debate on whether COVID vaccines should be made free or available at a cheaper cost for the general good of the global economy. What is your take on this, considering that pharma companies have to spend a huge amount on R&D, which is something which you focused on a lot during your lecture, and might not be able to recoup the profits if the prices are reduced? It sort of looks at a more of a socialistic perspective rather than a free market economy sort of a perspective, right? So, and yet pharma is a sector where companies have some sense of responsibility in a COVID kind of environment. So would you like to answer that, please?
Yeah, I'll share my views on this. We look at a business from two different perspectives. If I look at a business from its main corporate perspective and main business perspective, then obviously it does not make sense to do anything which reduces my profitability or shareholder value, right? But where is a corporate earning from? It is earning from society. It is the society which is filling the coffers of the corporates. And therefore, corporates have a social objective, they have a responsibility towards the society. They are not doing anything. They just have to give back something. When the times are good, you have made excellent money. Now the society needs something back from you. Why should you hesitate? Why should you make it a point of debate? Whether the companies, again, opportunities will come, times will come, and this has been recognized everywhere. And even in law, that is why the Companies Act 2013 very clearly formalizes a part of the corporate working, which is corporate social responsibilities. Now, in my view, free, I do not know, because at the end of the day, free may not be a viable proposition, because no business should become bankrupt in order to provide free. But yes, on a cost to cost basis. At the end of the day, the R&D, you see, one thing is there. My R&D cost may be huge, but the hugeness of the R&D cost can become diluted on the volumes. If my R&D cost is, let's say, 100, and I am able to sell 10 units, then the R&D cost per unit is 10. But if I am able to sell million units, then my R&D cost is negligible. So what we are talking about, number one, it is a definite social obligation in the larger interest of society. Why should I look at the interest of the society? Because it is the society which has made me what I am. If today I am Maruti, if today I am Nestle, if today I am Colgate, if today I am Asian Paints, it is not alone because of me, it is because of the participation of the society. And today, when the needs have arisen, the needs have to be met, pockets have not to be seen. And particularly with companies which have the classical example is during the COVID lockdown, there was a huge lockdown and businesses were supposed to go bankrupt. There was a huge hue and cry that the economy will come to a standstill. In less than a year, see what has happened to the results of the corporate world. See how the companies have bounced back. If the people survive, if the people get back to normalcy, had these vaccines not been given, do you think we would have been sitting here with activity around 90% of what it was in the pre-COVID levels? Now you have 100% in the air flight. Railways have resumed. It means that while you have incurred, treat this as an investment, and you are reaping the reward of that investment even now. Have I been able to answer the query?
Yes, sir. I think most definitely you've given us a very insightful answer. We have a couple of more questions, so I'm going to take those two questions which we have. Both of them are from our students. One student has actually specifically taken the question from the fly ash example that you've given.
Okay.
Will not the performance be affected if fly ash is substituted for limestone in making cement?
Yeah.
That is, I think it's a...
Okay. I'll answer this question first. You see, in any industry, before a thing is marketed, it is tested in the lab. And that is how they arrived at the ratio of 95% limestone and 5% fly ash. It is purely driven by R&D without impacting the quality. If the quality is impacted, it will be discarded. It will not be adopted. The bottom line is that value for money has to be maintained. Now take the case of the fan. The earlier fan version is gone, and today you have a completely modern fan. What is a fan supposed to do? It is supposed to give you air delivery. That is the most important performance part of the fan. And the air delivery of the modern fan is far greater, far better than that of its earlier version. So if the quality is not maintained, that innovation will not be accepted. You would have seen that many times you read in the newspaper or hear in the news that Volkswagen has called back this batch of cars manufactured from across the world. And free of cost, they are changing that particular component. Why does it happen? How does it happen? How did it leave the factory? It happens because the size of operations have become so large. If Maruti is sending out 120,000 cars in a month, which virtually means on a 25-day, it virtually means about more than 4,000 cars every day. Now, it is not possible to do quality check. It is not possible to do a quality check on the components you are getting from your vendors. Everything is accepted and straight away used in production. And then any field return is immediately taken in and replaced. Otherwise, it is not possible. Your factory will get choked. If Maruti cars do not leave the factory within 1 day, then the Maruti road in Gurgaon will get blocked. So one thing is very important to understand, that any innovation that is done on the back of a proper research, proper R&D, lab tests and everything. If it is found wanting, it will not be accepted. That change will not be incorporated. In the limestone, in the cement industry, they found that if they mix it in the ratio of 95:5, then the tensile strength of the cement remains the same. So that is why they incorporated it.
Right, sir. And we'll take one final question for this evening. We have one of our students who's actually written, who's actually said, "Thank you for such a great and insightful lecture."
Thank you.
I have a question that why can't companies be 100% debt driven? Why is there always a need for equity to be present?
Excellent. Now I have a counter question to this gentleman. I want to be 100% debt oriented company. Tell me which bank will give me. I go to a bank and say the project cost of my company is 10 crores and I want 10 crores from you as debt in order to get into this project. Do you think any lender will give you 10 crores or the total amount of capital in debt? What is a lender looking for when he is giving you debt? He is looking for your commitment to the project. He is looking for your investment. Unless and until, how he will say you are not putting in a single rupee and you want me to put in 100 rupees, 100%. What is your commitment in the project?
What about a valuation-based idea, sir? Like, wouldn't that sort of, considering that in today's market, we have a lot of profit, we either have two types of companies. We have either the profit and loss, the good old traditional companies, which are based on profit and loss and who have a steady rate of growth. And then we have the valuation-based companies, which are there to primarily looking for the quick buck, right? In such a scenario, you have a lot of startups who have a very high valuation, but they also have very high amount of debt as well.
No. One thing. They don't have a very high amount of debt. What they have is a very high amount of financial participation by venture capitalists, by funds who have put in money there. Now, these funds they have not necessarily put in money as debt. They have put in money as an equity stake, because nobody will give debt at that stage. What they have, I'll give you a very simple example. There was a company called Mindtree. If you remember in the IT, it was started by 9 people who were working in a company called Wipro. And the main promoter was Ashok Soota. Mr. Ashok Soota was the one who floated Mindtree along with 8 of his friends, all technocrats. Now, when they formed this company, they did not have enough money, so venture capitalists came in and they invested the money with them. And it was decided that when the venture capitalist will exit, he will give the first option to these promoters to buy back his equity. Now the company was formed, the venture capitalist put in the money, Mr. Ashok Soota and his team, the great management guys they are, they managed to take the company from a 10 rupee, the valuation went up to 700 rupees. Now the venture capitalist has no interest in holding on to the equity. He has done it only for a project. He wants to get out of it and go into another startup. So the point is, when he approached them and the market price had risen so much, they did not have the money to buy. So they kept on telling him that, no, don't sell, we will buy. They could not come together. Ashok Soota exited, the other people held on, and finally it was sold to L&T. Finally, this company was sold off to L&T with a lot of noise from the old promoters. The venture capitalist said, I'm not bound to you. I've given you the first offer. Why are you not taking it? You can't take it and you can't prevent me from exiting. How will that work? So you have talked about valuation, so I'll take 2 minutes on that. You see, what is the conventional wisdom relating to valuation? I value a business enterprise. Now, what does conventional wisdom say? Something is valuable if it has got a monetary value, if it has got a monetary net worth. What is net worth? Net worth is my total asset, my total capital minus my debt and minus my, in other words, my reserves. My reserves constitute the major part of your net worth, right? All assets minus external liabilities is equal to net worth, right? So where does the net worth come from? From reserves. What are reserves? Reserves are profits. So conventional wisdom tells me that I cannot create enterprise value unless and until I make money, unless and until there is profit. Now, what is happening is, all of a sudden we find that there are businesses which are there, which have a huge track record. Now, Paytm is not new in the business. Everybody knows Paytm. It has a footprint, a large footprint in the business. Flipkart had a large footprint in the business. It got, it got picked on 16 crores, at 16 crores by Walmart. Similarly, Zomato came in. Zomato is not new. None of these new, we call them startups, but they are not startups. They are digital marketing companies who are in business for quite some time. But the tragedy is that they are in business, they are expanding in business, and yet they are losing money. So this is a paradox. How can I expand and lose? Somebody has to fund my losses. Otherwise, how will I expand? So who's funding those losses? It is these people who have invested in the hope that these companies will become money spinners like Amazons of the world. It is their wisdom. So where do these sort of enterprises get their valuation from? Obviously, if we try to determine their valuation from the point of view of conventional wisdom, we will say they are worthless. Not only are they not earning money, they don't have a vision, they don't have a roadmap to tell you that we will begin to earn money from this time. They are completely in the dark. They can't tell you when will they become profitable. And yet, a Zomato sells for 72 and it gets listed at 140. And yet Paytm lists at 2150 and it fell to 1300 and something, and I bought it at 1400 and something because I knew that at 1400 it is a good buy. At 2150 it may be useless. So at 1400 I picked it up, and today hopefully, I think it was 1800 or something, it will go and settle down at 1700 or so. So the value is being created not by profits but by footprints in the market. This is a new concept, and this concept is yet to be tried out. So what is happening? You have got fund managers. Now, all the fund managers and investment gurus like Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, Ramdev Agarwal of Oswal Agro, Nilesh Shah of Kotak Securities, Nimesh Shah. Nimesh Shah was a bit in two minds, but all these guys, and Rakesh Jhunjhunwala was the most vocal. He said, I don't have to be in every party. I will not join a party which I don't understand. I don't understand these valuations. It defies whatever I've learned, it defies that concept. So how can I will rather wait and watch how these companies deliver. At the end of the day, their valuation has to come through profitability. Today, they may be having a high valuation. Nobody knows 2 years down the road if they are not performing. Just imagine, these loss-making companies are selling like gold. On the other hand, TCS reports its second quarter or third quarter results and shows that the margins have deteriorated by 20 basis points and the share price falls by 15%. How can the stock market adopt two different approaches to the same problem? On the one hand, you are valuing a losing company in gold. On the other hand, a blue chip company with excellent management and business track record, who's in an adverse environment, who's doing well, given you a higher EPS, but has not been able to hold its margin, and the share price has fallen by 15%. From 3,900, it came down to 3,400. So it is a very difficult thing to understand. If you ask me, what I've been able to interpret so far is that it is the market share that is getting that valuation, in the hope that in the next 2-3 years, that market share will transform these companies into highly profitable companies. Whether that happens or not, there is no track record to show that, because this is a new thing that is happening in the Indian stock market space. It is, for all you know, Zomato may come down to 5 rupees. Indian Overseas Bank was 152 rupees in 2014. Today it is at 20 rupees.
That is quite a perspective, and I think that last question itself in the last 5 minutes itself could be another guest lecture with you, sir. And could be a massive debate that we can actually bring in a few more panelists. But I think that's also a very good note to sort of understand how the market is functioning and how values are rising and falling. And on that note, I would like to thank everybody who's actually gone ahead and participated in this guest lecture. First up, I would like to thank Professor Arun Kumar Agarwal, who's taken out his valuable time to share with us some amazing insights into how the world is functioning today and how India's landscape has changed over the last 50-60 years, especially since 1993. Secondly, I would like to thank Dr. Uma Nagarajan, who's one of our esteemed faculty at ISBF and who had helped us reach out to you and made this guest lecture a success.